They never introduced me at the party, not as a sister, not even as family. I poured the wine, cleared the plates, and smiled when they toasted my brother's future. That was the night I realized I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. And the moment my father said, "You'll get nothing," I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I owned the land the party was on. Because the company they bragged about was registered under my name. They thought I was a ghost, but I had been documenting everything, quietly, precisely. And tonight, I wasn't leaving invisible. I was leaving as the storm. Somewhere between the drafts of my grandfather's will, I disappeared. Not physically, not even legally, just disappeared. Like a name written in pencil and smudged until only a faint outline remained. The day of my brother's engagement party, I arrived early, before the florist, before the caterer, even before the bride-to-be. I helped rearrange chairs, lit candles on the outdoor tables, and refolded napkins 3 times because Mom said the creases weren't clean enough. Nobody noticed I was there. Nobody asked where I'd been. They called me the helpful one when they acknowledged me at all, though one of my aunties leaned over and whispered to her daughter, "Is that the maid?" It stung, but I smiled. I always did. After all, I was the eldest, the one who took care of everyone else, the one who gave up her apartment in Boston when Dad's heart surgery nearly bankrupted the family. The one who moved back home and started managing the family business's books because no one else understood tax codes. The one who never asked for anything in return. But that day, something small and stupid cracked everything open. I was cleaning up the den, stacking old magazines, and picking up after people who hadn't even arrived yet, when a notebook slipped off the top shelf of my grandfather's old roll-top desk. It burst open midair, pages fluttering like wings before landing at my feet. I bent down to gather it and paused. A line on one of the pages had been underlined in red. Shareholder allocation, Rachel Morgan, 100%. I stared at it, blinking. Then I flipped through the rest of the page. No other names, no percentage breakdowns. Just that single line, written in my grandfather's old, slanted handwriting. The kind I used to forge on report cards in high school when I didn't want to explain a B- in chemistry. I felt a cold flutter in my chest. A joke? A draft? A mistake? That night, during dinner, I tried to act normal. Tried not to keep looking at my parents, my brother, wondering what they knew. When Mom passed the mashed potatoes across the table, I cleared my throat. "Do you remember when Grandpa rewrote his will a few years ago?" I asked. Her fork paused in midair. She didn't even look at me. "Honey, I don't think now's the time. I found something. It had my name on it, in his handwriting." She smiled, tight-lipped. "You're imagining things again. You always overthink." There it was, again. The lifelong diagnosis she'd given me at 13 and never revoked. Overthinking, too sensitive, too emotional, never just right. Across the table, my brother laughed at something his fiancée said. The conversation kept moving. My question evaporated. Later that night, I went looking through the photo album in the living room. I wanted to remind myself that I belonged here, that even if they dismissed me, I was part of the story. But when I turned the page to our last family vacation, Cancun, 2 years ago, I stopped cold. My face was missing. In the photo where I knew I'd stood between my father and my brother, there was a smudge, a faint digital blur. Someone had used editing software to crop me out. I flipped again, same blur, again and again. In the wedding photo from my cousin's ceremony, I'd been cut from the group entirely. I was the only one missing. I didn't say anything. I closed the album, sat on the couch in silence, felt the weight of years pressing against my chest. Had I ever really been in this family? Or had I just been the scaffolding they used to build their lives, then discarded once the structure stood on its own? I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, watching the ceiling fan spin in lazy circles above me. The next morning, I drove to a coffee shop 2 towns over. I took out a notebook and started writing everything I remembered about my grandfather's business. Transactions, conversations, tax filings, unusual account activity, every thread I could still follow. Not because I wanted revenge, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be erased quietly. I started with the ledgers. Quietly, after hours, in the office above my parents' garage, where we stored the family business records. It wasn't hard. I'd built most of the accounting system myself years ago, back when no one else cared enough to track the numbers beyond what they could spend. I knew the passwords, I knew the routing numbers, I knew the patterns. But what I found didn't follow any of them. There were 12 transfers, large ones, each spaced roughly 6 months apart over the last 6 years, all routed through shell companies, all landing in an offshore account registered in Panama. The name on the account, Jason Morgan, my younger brother. Jason barely knew how to open a PDF. He once asked me if Excel could do subtraction. Yet here he was, moving nearly $3 million out of our U.S. accounts like a seasoned money launderer. I printed the statements, highlighted each transaction, created a separate file on an encrypted flash drive, and hid it in the false bottom of a desk drawer. Then I waited. The opportunity came 3 days later, over dinner. The table was loud, crowded with extended family, raised glasses, and Jason's fiancée, gushing about honeymoon plans. Between bites of roast chicken, I leaned back and asked, as casually as I could manage, "Have you ever been to Panama?" The clinking of silverware stopped. Jason blinked. "Panama?" "Yeah," I said, still smiling. "I heard it's beautiful this time of year." He laughed, too loud, too forced. "No, why would I go to Panama?" Dad cleared his throat. "Where'd that come from, Rachel?" I shrugged. "Just curious." They moved on quickly, but the air never quite recovered. What they didn't know was that before dinner, while setting the table, I'd slid a tiny voice recorder beneath the table's central beam. I retrieved it later that night and listened to the post-dinner conversation from the kitchen. "Jason, do you think she knows?" "Mom, she doesn't know anything. She's always looking for drama." "Dad, just keep your mouth shut. She's harmless." That word again, harmless. I should have felt insulted. I felt calm, cold even. But cold was useful. A few nights later, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, scrolling through old emails. I'd archived everything out of habit, receipts, family updates, even spam. I opened the spam folder without knowing why. And that's when I saw them. 6 emails, all from the same sender. A name I hadn't thought about in years, Charles Greeley. He'd been my grandfather's estate attorney. The subject line of one email read, "Re-urgent distribution clarification." Another, "Rachel, please confirm receipt of attached documents." The attachments were PDFs. I clicked. The first one was a scanned letter. My name, my grandfather's signature. A notarized page dated 2 weeks before his death. I opened the next. It was a digital copy of the will, and my name was at the top, not as a witness, not in a footnote, as the sole beneficiary. I stared at the screen, my heart thudding like a war drum. Then I checked the email headers. Each had been sent weeks before the funeral, each marked unread. But I'd never seen them. They'd been automatically filtered into spam, unless someone filtered them on purpose. I checked my email security settings. 2 years ago, a password change. Logged from my mother's home IP address. My stomach turned. I grabbed my coat, ran to the car, and drove without thinking. Parked in the shadow of a church parking lot, and finally let myself cry. I cried until I couldn't breathe. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the confirmation that they hadn't forgotten me. They had deliberately erased me. Every legal step, every financial document, every familial photo, every seat skipped at every party. Not an accident, a design. They erased me. I sobbed until my body hurt, until the windshield blurred, until I hated how much I still wanted to belong to people who didn't see me as theirs. When the tears dried, I sat back and whispered aloud, I didn't disappear. They made me disappear. I turned the key in the ignition and drove home in silence. Grandpa's house had been sitting mostly untouched for 2 years. A relic at the edge of town, full of creaking wood floors and shelves that smelled like dust and time. After he died, no one had wanted to deal with it. The rest of the family took what they wanted: antiques, paintings, the bourbon he kept locked in the cabinet. I took nothing, until now. I told Mom I was going to help clean it out. She shrugged, told me to take whatever junk hadn't already been stripped. She never cared for the place. The air inside was stale. I walked through it like I used to as a child, trailing my hand along the railings, feeling the worn grooves of the banister, each one a memory. I made my way to the study, Grandpa's sanctuary. I started with the drawers, old letters, legal pads filled with notes, a flask still half full. Then I noticed something odd beneath the Persian rug, slightly raised floorboards in the corner. I pulled the rug aside. 3 planks were loose. I lifted them and found a metal handle. Beneath it, a hidden staircase spiraled downward. It smelled like cedar and something older. At the bottom was a small windowless room. Just shelves and boxes, meticulously labeled, stacked, organized. I flicked on the light. Everything was there: financial records, journals, voice recordings. A full catalog of family history, preserved like evidence for a trial that had yet to come. It felt like a tomb, or a time capsule, or a warning. I reached for a box labeled 20 to 20 Estate Prep. Inside, copies of the will, correspondence with his attorney, and a small cassette tape. Written across it in thick black ink, "Rachel, if you're hearing this, do what's right." I froze. I hadn't heard his voice in years. With shaking hands, I dug out a small recorder from another box and pressed play. His voice filled the room, steady, firm. "If you're listening to this, it means they didn't tell you. It means they took what wasn't theirs. And I'm sorry, sweetheart. I knew they would. I left everything to you because you're the only one I could trust not to waste it. Not to turn it into something ugly. They always saw you as weak because you were kind. But kindness isn't weakness. It's strength that doesn't need an audience. You were never invisible to me." The tape ended. I sat there in silence. He knew. He knew exactly who they were. And still, he tried to protect me. I spent hours cataloging everything, scanning files, photographing documents. It was like assembling a case. Except the crime had already happened, and the victims didn't even know yet that justice was on its way. But I needed help. I couldn't do this alone. So I reached out to the one person I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Claire Bennett. She and I had sat next to each other in every honors class in high school. She went to law school. I went into accounting. We hadn't kept in touch, but I remembered seeing her name recently on a firm website I'd stumbled across while Googling asset recovery. She picked up on the first ring. "Rachel, it's been a while," I said. "I need help, and I can't trust anyone else." 2 hours later, we met in a cafe off a quiet street. I laid it out, everything, Panama, the doctored photos, the will, the tape. Claire didn't flinch. She listened, asked precise questions, took notes. "I was actually retained by your grandfather once," she said finally. "He told me if anything went sideways with the estate, to expect your call. I didn't think he was serious, but I'm glad he was." It was the first time in weeks I felt like I wasn't standing on a crumbling cliff alone. We built a plan, timeline, legal steps, evidence catalog, backup drives. She would file motions quietly, subpoenas through third parties, no flashy entrances, no courtroom dramas, just precision, just truth. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with the files stacked around me, the hum of the fridge, the only sound, and suddenly I remembered a moment. I was 9, my brother was 7. We'd both gotten report cards. Mine had all A's, his had mostly C's. I ran home, beaming, showed my mother. She didn't smile. She looked at my grades, then at Jason's, and said, "You really shouldn't show off like that. It makes him feel bad." Then she grounded me for a week, for bragging. I hadn't thought of that memory in years. Now I saw it clearly, the beginning. The moment I learned to shrink myself so others could stretch. The first time I understood that being exceptional came with a price if you were born a girl in a family like mine. But I wasn't 9 anymore, and I wasn't shrinking. I was documenting, preparing, moving forward. I didn't want revenge, I wanted truth. The invitations had gone out months before, gold-embossed envelopes with Jason and Madison's names in cursive, sealed with wax and arrogance. I wasn't invited, not formally, but my name was scribbled in a text from Mom the week before. "If you're coming, don't wear white. Be useful, not dramatic." So I wore black. A sleek, floor-length dress with a modest neckline. No sparkle, no lace. Just the same dress my grandfather had bought me the week before he died. He said it made me look exactly like someone who knows her worth. I arrived halfway through the ceremony, slipping quietly into the back row just as the officiant was inviting everyone to rise. My heels made no sound on the polished floor. No one noticed me, not yet. Jason stood at the altar beaming, hands clasped nervously in front of him. Madison, radiant in her designer gown, smiled with the ease of someone who believed the entire world had been arranged to serve her happiness. My mother sat in the front row dabbing at imaginary tears. Dad looked bored. The officiant cleared his throat. "Before we continue with the vows, is there anyone here who—" I stepped forward. The silence hit like a dropped plate. "Excuse me," I said calmly, walking past rows of shocked faces. Jason's face twisted. "Rachel, what the hell are you doing?" "Just a moment," I said. "There's something the bride and groom and everyone else should see before any more vows are exchanged." I reached into my bag and pulled out a small remote, pointed it at the projector screen behind the altar, which had just displayed a slideshow of baby photos and vacation pictures. The screen flickered. Then a video began to play. It was grainy, time-stamped, with my grandfather's unmistakable voice echoing through the room. If you're listening to this, it means they didn't tell you. It means they took what wasn't theirs. A gasp rippled through the guests. I turned to face the room. This is the real will, the real testimony. My grandfather left everything to me because he knew the rest of you couldn't be trusted with it. Jason stepped forward, face red. Turn that off. But it was too late. The video continued. Records of bank transfers, notarized documents, voice memos. A collage of truth, unedited, unfiltered. My mother fainted before the final page of the will hit the screen. Dad didn't move. He stared at me like I'd grown fangs. The officiant quietly stepped off stage. Guests whispered. Some stood to leave. Others pulled out their phones. Jason tried to yell something, but his voice cracked. She's lying. She's jealous. No one replied. I looked straight at him. You built this wedding with money that wasn't yours. You made promises you can't keep. And I'm done being silent. Then I left. Outside, the sun was too bright. My hands trembled, but I held them still. In the distance, I heard someone shout my name. I kept walking. By the time the headlines hit the internet, I was already home. Family fortune fraud, viral wedding video sparks legal battle. Anonymous whistleblower exposes inheritance scandal at high-profile ceremony. They didn't know it was me, not yet, but they would. Calls flooded in, reporters, old family friends. A few lawyers, including one who used to represent our company, and now wanted to switch sides. Claire fielded everything. She told me to stay quiet. You don't owe them a single word. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove. Not far, just to the house I'd grown up in, the one we'd left behind after my grandfather died. It had been empty since. I stepped inside, the air heavy with memory. Upstairs, in the small bedroom with pale blue walls, I found it still there. The notebook I kept when I was 12, tucked behind a loose floorboard, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. Inside, pages of dreams, crushes, fears. One line stopped me. I think I will disappear one day and no one will notice. I closed the notebook. Then my phone buzzed. It was Claire. You should check your email. In my inbox, a scanned document. A signed affidavit from my aunt, my mother's sister. Attached was a bank form, account transfer, signature authorization. The name at the bottom, my grandfather. But the handwriting wasn't his. My aunt wrote, I saw her do it. I never said anything. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen, not surprised, not angry, just tired. The final domino had fallen. I forwarded the entire folder to Claire. No commentary, no threats, just the truth. The courtroom smelled of old wood and cold air. Everything about it felt quiet, clinical, stripped of ceremony. I sat on the left beside Claire, dressed in navy and steel. Across from me were my parents, Jason, and their attorney, a man who once shook my hand at a Christmas party and told me I had such polite eyes. They didn't look at me, not once. I didn't look at them, either. Not out of pride, out of preservation. The judge, an older woman with tired eyes and the patience of stone, flipped through a stack of papers as if they were nothing more than grocery lists. But each one was a nail in a coffin, emails, bank records, testimonies, the forged signature affidavit from my aunt, the video, the will, the timeline. Claire laid it all out with precision, no grandstanding. She didn't need to. The truth didn't require theater. Their lawyer tried, claimed I was unstable, claimed my grandfather was coerced, claimed I'd hacked the will, claimed everything except what was clearly printed on every page in front of him. The judge asked them one question. Can you provide verifiable evidence that supports your claim to the estate? Silence. Mom's lip quivered. Jason shifted in his chair. Dad clenched his jaw so tightly I heard it pop. When the verdict came, it wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm, like rain before a flood. This court finds that the transfer of assets from the estate of Thomas Morgan was fraudulently altered. The documentation submitted by the defendants is determined to be fabricated with intent to deceive. The estate is hereby awarded in full to Rachel Morgan. Furthermore, evidence of willful forgery and financial misrepresentation shall be submitted to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Jason gasped. My mother buried her face in trembling hands. My father didn't move. Claire leaned over and whispered, "It's done." I nodded, but I didn't smile. As we exited the courtroom, a cluster of reporters waited outside. Flashes, questions, voices overlapping. One reporter, barely out of college, asked the only question I thought worth answering. How does it feel to be the woman who took down her entire family? I paused, met her eyes. I didn't take anyone down, I said. They built a house of lies. I just stopped holding the door open. Later that night, I watched the clip on the evening news. A quiet force in navy blue, the anchor said. Rachel Morgan, the invisible daughter, now known as the whistleblower who dismantled one of the region's most powerful legacy families. I turned the TV off. I didn't feel powerful. I felt exhausted. Back in my office, the one Jason used to occupy, I sat behind the desk, his desk, now mine, and looked at the photo I hadn't moved yet, one of the few still hanging on the wall. Our family in front of the lake house, smiling, matching sweaters, picture perfect. Except now I saw it for what it was, a performance. I stood up, took the frame down, and stared at it. I remembered that day. It was the same day Dad had yelled at me for not bringing enough snacks. The same day Mom called me ungrateful because I didn't thank Jason for driving us. The same day I realized my happiness was always transactional in that house. I sat back down, photo in my lap, and cried for the girl I used to be, for the woman I had to become, for every moment in between that cost me more than I could explain to anyone else. There were no champagne bottles, no speeches, no celebration, just quiet. And finally, clarity. I'd won. But not because they lost, because I could finally breathe, because I had stopped begging to be seen by people who'd only ever looked through me, because for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch when I took up space. I whispered to the empty office, "I'm not happy they lost." I placed the photo face down on the desk. "I'm just happy I don't have to kneel anymore." The offers came fast. Book deals, exclusive interviews, podcasts, speaking tours. Some promised 7 figures just for the rights to my silence. Others wanted my voice to amplify theirs. I read every proposal and let them sit unopened in a folder on my desktop named Noise. I didn't want revenge, not anymore. I didn't sue for damages. I didn't press for defamation. I let the civil court route go untraveled, even when Claire gently reminded me how much we could win. My win had already happened, so I redirected the energy. I bought a small office space near downtown, nothing flashy. 3 rooms, soft lighting, coffee machine that made awful espresso. I called it Verity Legal Aid. We offered free legal consultation to women navigating family-based financial abuse. Within the first month, our voicemail filled daily. In each client, I saw a former version of myself, quiet, scared, ashamed of how much they'd given to people who never gave back. We taught them to document, to speak clearly, to know the law better than their abusers ever expected them to. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they yelled, sometimes they just sat in silence and let the weight lift. One rainy afternoon, I stayed late to finish a stack of intake forms. The door chimed open just as I was shutting down. He stood there, older now, hair a bit thinner, smile just as unsure as it had been when we were 25, Michael, and beside him a girl, maybe 6, holding a tattered stuffed rabbit. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," he said. "I always stay late on Thursdays." He nodded. "I saw the headlines. I waited. I didn't want to be another knock at your door." The little girl tugged his sleeve. "Daddy?" He crouched beside her. "This is Rachel. She's an old friend." She waved. I smiled. "Hi, sweetheart." Michael straightened. "Her name's Hope." Of course it was. "She's not why I came," he added. "I came because you once said you couldn't choose me over your family. And I get it. I really do. But I just thought maybe, now, you could choose yourself." I didn't say anything, just looked at them, felt the sharp edge of the past soften like sanded wood under a steady hand. We talked for an hour, laughed once, then they left. But he slipped a note into my hand before going. It said, "If you ever want coffee with someone who doesn't expect anything from you, I'm around." That night, I opened the file again, the one named Noise. I deleted it. 2 months later, my book came out. I called it The Daughter Who Wasn't Meant to Be Seen. It was quiet, honest, a collection of memories, court transcripts, journal entries, no embellishments. No names changed. It went viral. Readers wrote in from everywhere, women, men, children, even a judge who admitted she once dismissed a case too quickly. Netflix bought the rights. I declined to star in the adaptation. "I'm not the story," I told them. "The silence is." They hired an actress who looked nothing like me. She was louder, sharper, more theatrical. I didn't mind. If it helped someone else see themselves, that was enough. One morning, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment. The city was waking. Car horns, birds, life. In my hands, a letter. It had arrived 2 weeks ago, no return address, handwritten, yellowed envelope. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. Grandpa. I opened it again. "Rachel, if this reaches you, it means you kept going. I always knew you would. They tried to make you small, but I saw you every single day. I left you the things they wanted because I knew you'd never let those things own you. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be seen to exist. But I hope one day you'll see yourself the way I always did. And if you're reading this, then you finally have. That's enough. Love, Grandpa." I folded the letter, held it to my chest. The sun crept over the buildings. The world didn't applaud. But for the first time in my life, I didn't need it to.